Ted, you are bringing the fancy. I've got to up my game.
Yeah.
Yeah, we should have a blazer day. Like
I'll just wear Seth's blazer.
Yeah.
Oversized.
Whatever works. That's cool. That's cool now.
Matching fancy socks.
Yes. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, team. So we're going to talk
Avengers
about
Assemble over here.
Yes. Oh, we should all each have like our own Avengers thing. I think that would be fun. We're going to get started on our part 2 of our sensory chat. I think we left things not last week. It was earlier this week.
Tuesday.
That was 2 days ago. That was Tuesday. What are days?
Dienstag.
What?
Dienstag. That's German for Tuesday.
Oh.
Exactly. That's so cool. I don't know.
What is German for Thursday?
Donnerstag.
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 Hey, Donnerstag.
Donnerstag.
Donnerstag. Donnerstag.
Donnerstag. Happy Donnerstag, everyone.
Yeah.
Try to. It's really not hard to get me off track. So I'm sorry. But we're going to do part 2 of sensory. I think we're going to talk about some more speech stuff. I think we brought up specifically Chewies. Yeah. And maybe some sensory room chats, because a lot of teachers and a lot of schools have entire rooms dedicated to sensory. So
I was thinking about this too the past couple of days while we talk about it. I want to kind of, I worry about it when we go back into school in the fall, and just thinking about all, like, you know, I know there's a lot of questions in the air of what's going to be, but I think proactively, you know, how do we maintain germs with like sensory, like if there are sensory rooms, or if there is the use of a Chewy, like with what we've been dealing with going into next year.
We don't want to maintain the germs. We want to kill them.
Yes.
That's right.
Yes.
We do.
We want to avoid the spread of them. Let's not maintain them.
No, I don't want to maintain them. You're correct. So I guess like that was something I was thinking about. I was like, okay, like, what does that look like? I don't know. So go ahead, Katie. Sorry to interrupt.
No, this is a chat.
Yeah. So Carrie, going into the next school year, is there anything that you guys are doing preemptively to look at all like the sensory equipment to make sure that germs aren't being spread? Or
Well, in the environment that I work in, they are looking into very specialized, highly intelligent, they tell me, kinds of ways to kill germs. So it'll be light and different things, so it's not toxic substances. So there will be like a protocol. There's going to, for therapies, there will be individual rooms and specific items to be used, and then a place to put them where they need to be cleaned. There might actually be giant plastic partitions. And all those things, you know, we think about, it's going to help in terms of the transmission of germs. It will significantly impede communication, connection, all those, you know what I mean? And so it's going to be a double-edged sword. We've started just to really talk with parents during the summer with social stories about washing hands and wearing masks and how-tos. So we sent that out to all the parents. So at least they have some, hopefully, background and been practicing. But it's going to be problematic. But I remember what Ted said on Tuesday. We're going to look at each individual student and assess where they're at and make a plan. Include family, include all staff.
I love that.
And move forward.
Awesome. Because I know a lot of teachers have like sensory bins, like bins of rice, don't do water beads. I tried that once. That wasn't the best idea.
It was fun to chase the beads down in your room.
They're probably still in there.
The sensory bins, you know, every square inch of this planet, if you're an organism living on it, is sensory, right? Yeah. There's no part that isn't sensory. So I don't know. I just don't get it. It seems to me that with the sensory rooms and the sensory things, we're either just replacing one sensory with another sensory, or we're just throwing one sensory on top of another sensory. You know, because that's how all living organisms experience their world, through their senses.
Right. And it's interesting because even the sensory kind of groups that are targeting parents and therapists, with the addition of people having sensory rooms, they've come out with a very strong statement saying that there is no evidence that is showing that those sensory rooms, especially unless it's highly, highly structured per student, is evidence-based at all. They are, which is really great. And they're talking about, they use ABA words and principles to make things individualistic. And they talk about that, and to use sensory in the antecedent phase, but again, not arbitrary. They have been very, very strong now with their language, because I think that's what we did as therapists and clinicians. And it was not what was best for students. We thought it might be, it was not.
If you're using the sensory rooms the way the Snoozelen people said to use them in the beginning, and they're the ones who came up with them and started selling them.
Yes.
You go in there and there are no demands. You're not told to do anything. It's just, you get to chill or do whatever you want to do within reason. And there are no demands.
Yeah,
Life
it turns
is
into
good.
a recess.
You're not telling the person to touch their nose or to do math or to do anything. So, there's kind of a confound there, because it's, am I seeing what I'm seeing? Because there's no demands, and so I'm not telling the person to do anything. And if those demands are, aversive stimuli that the person shuts down by behaving aggressively or engaging in self-injury or whatever, but they're not getting them there, is that why things are kind of chill? Or is it kind of chill because that's the environment? And there is research that shows that, people do actually chill when they're in the sensory rooms. But the effect doesn't last. The effect is all gone within 15 minutes of coming out of the sensory rooms. So
if the sensory rooms, and if the
ahead.
sensory rooms are calm.
Yeah.
Because like what the research or the information I was looking at was just what Katie was saying. It was more of a recess and a free for all. And children became more disorganized. If you even just had a pure sensory approach, it was not effective.
Because there's a trampoline and there's a swing and there's mats and
there's all the cool lights, and there's the aromatherapy diffuser, and there's music if you want.
They also, I've seen, when recess, like we can't have recess outside because it's too cold or rainy. It's like, we'll have indoor recess, which that includes the sensory room. And it's like, no, that's the last place you should be accessing right now. I personally had experience with sensory rooms, or the use of a sensory room where it was more, they wanted access. In the space, and so they engaged, like Ted was saying, in that self-interest behavior, and they allowed access to it. And it, I was always debating. I was like, is this child trying to escape or avoid? In the classroom, there's probably more. There's that task demand, like you were saying, and it's like,
or is it the child learned the way you earn the sensory room is by aggressive self-injury?
Yeah.
And if and so there it's kind of, you could call it negative reinforcement. I think it's kind of positive reinforcement, because they didn't have access to the sensory room before they engaged in the SIB or aggression. They engage in the SIB or aggression, then they get access to the sensory room. Well, what if we make access to the sensory room contingent on other stuff? And that's individualized per student. So, it's this one does this much work to get in, but another one does this much work to get in, another one this one, because that's that's what
I think it's interesting that you mentioned the positive reinforcement, because I agree with you 100%. And I think it's more negative reinforcement for the teacher. If the child is having some kind of self-interest behavior, seeing that as a teacher is very aversive to us. We want it to stop, right?
That's right.
And so our behavior of giving access to that room as teachers continues to increase. I don't know.
Because it gives them a break. No, I agree. We've talked about
we're removing that
they don't have to do
aversive
instruction at that time then.
That's exactly right. And again, to remember that we are part of the equation, and decisions and what we see and do reinforce our own behavior.
I don't know. That was always something I thought about, and I've tried to explain to teachers, but I think it's, it's hard when you're seeing a child that's physically hurting themselves, and you're like, we have to stop this behavior.
And again, they're reading information saying that's what they should do. That some of the information I read last night too, and I don't think it's like at a scholarly level that is great, but they were looking just at cognition and said that sensory rooms that it's never recommended for a child under 6. And think about the preschools that are inundated with that. And they have recommendations for future, for
Yeah.
future studies to really look at that. And or even if their mental age,
Yeah,
is
their
less than
cognitive
that,
level,
their
I feel like
cognitive
would
level
also weigh into that.
Exactly, and that's what they say. And like I said, I don't know how research worthy it is, but it
Mhm.
was one that was saying these are the things we need to really have formal research about.
And maybe if we embed more positive reinforcement in the classroom and in
Right.
the other
Yes.
environments, we don't need to do so much with the sensory room.
Mhm.
And I don't mean let's put those cool lights and everything else in the classroom, that are in the sensory room. What I mean is, how about work that's appropriate to the student's level? How about instructional procedures that are effective? Because
Mhm.
with those two things right there, what you have is a student getting a lot of stuff right, and that this is kind of difficult feeling becoming a conditioned reinforcer, something that the student enjoys rather than shuts down. Kind of like, that's why I do my old man Sudokus on my phone. And when I do, every day I get 15 new ones, and I start with the one that's right in the middle. I don't want it too hard because that's wrong, wrong, wrong. No one likes that. I don't want it too easy because it's boring. That's if we infuse the regular environments with that stuff where there's great amount of success, some errors because we need some errors, and things are a little bit difficult, but there's a lot of success. We teach that difficult feeling to be a reinforcer, and maybe we don't see a whole lot of the behaviors that the sensory room is supposed to cure. And maybe the sensory features of that classroom environment themselves become reinforcing.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's just not even what's the word, functional, because you don't have a sensory room everywhere.
Right.
Yeah.
The
I
grocery
mean,
store doesn't have
so
one.
there has to
Walmart
be a
doesn't have one.
component.
Yeah.
If we're going to be functional, and OTs are functional, then it has to be something that can be carried out in all the environments of their life and throughout their life. But gyms, like we all work out at the gym. Well, some of us don't anymore, but they will soon again. And having that as part of my life makes everything seem more calm. You know what I mean? So we do, like Ted said, we do embed things in all of our lives.
Yeah, but look at what we've done, like for adults, like gyms have been closed. We've had to adapt
That's right.
and move towards. So if we're looking at the gym as our sensory room, what can we embed in our natural environment to still get that same adult
Awesome.
rush? And
Good thinking.
And it's still structured. There's still a point to it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the gym isn't
hang
our
out.
only sensory room.
Yeah.
I'm
Well, you
setting it
might
up.
be.
I'm an interrupter. I'll work on it. The gym isn't our only sensory room. Look at how I've arranged my new office. My
It's
home
very
office.
nice.
I am so proud of
Art on
you.
the wall that I
Oh, I
like.
love
That's
your
the furniture I
tree
like. There's
picture.
all my books. And
Cozy.
I like how they're arranged. There's this. Look at all those diplomas and licenses. And certificates. This is stuff I have to work on. There's a mess on my desk, but I like it all except for the mess on my desk. But and cooling floor covering and dogs on the floor. I bring this up because, we arrange our own sensory environments because we're big grown-ups and we can do that, right?
Yep.
And we kind of enhance our environments to make it more comfortable and more appealing, which means more positive reinforcement, right?
Mhm.
And it evokes good feelings.
Mhm.
And we do this in our homes. And, it just, again, everywhere we happen to be is a sensory environment. Some of them we have more control over than others. Y'all were just talking about a little while ago how you like going to the office and how Amber has, taken care of her space and everything.
Yep.
Well, that's a sensory environment.
Yep.
We need to
It's
go
increasing productivity.
without
Yeah, there's a
sensory, no
point
matter
to
where
it.
we are.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
you
and
know,
I have
Go
a room with nothing on the walls just about, and it's just my desk because I'm
and that
distracted.
works for you.
It
Right.
sure does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
And I got to choose. I mean, for kids who are cognitively able, to have them help prepare a workstation is marvelous. Because it does become theirs and then they own it and they're more invested. It's just not, many of our children are not able to do that, but
Well,
some are.
And you make it a place where you want to be rather than have to be.
Correct.
Right.
Katie,
And want to be, that's positive reinforcement. Have to be, that's negative reinforcement.
Correct.
And you get more work, you get more discretionary effort out of the wannabe situations than the have to be situations.
Katie, I remember you mentioning with the setup of your classroom, you actually tried to have, you were more of like the minimalist teacher, correct?
Absolutely. And that was under the direction of Chad, because I mean, I was so excited. I had a theme. It was a cute rainbow theme. I had so much, like, I had like these cool puff balls that you get for like parties that you hang from the ceiling. And Chad's like, you have climbers.
Yeah.
I was like, okay.
I mentioned this
Yeah.
because of what Ted was saying, you know,
Right.
we create, it's more positively reinforcing. And so I wonder if, like, you know, the way that we design our classrooms is very subjective for ourselves, and where we're
Sure.
like, oh, this is so cute. The kids will love it. The parents will love it. But it's like,
You have to find a balance.
what? Yeah. And
Who
I
are
think
you designing the room for? And-
Exactly. It's
and
for
that's
the
end
kids.
result. Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
But it's also, you have to be comfortable too. So you have to, you know, I had my favorite pens and I was a happy lady. You know, you have to find what works for you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just the physical features, it's what goes on in the situation, because you can have horrible things happening in a beautiful place.
Yes.
And that beautiful place becomes a place you avoid. Right now, dig this. I have a pile of paperwork I have to get through. It's been piling up for 2 weeks now because I've been way too busy.
Right.
That goes away tomorrow morning. I'm going to get through it tomorrow morning. But right now, I kind of don't like being in here, even though it's nice, you know, because I got a pile of stuff waiting for me. For our students, you can make the environment as beautiful as you'd like. But again, what they need is a lot of yes, 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 yes. That's actually getting stuff right and being effective and doing stuff that works in that classroom.
So I think
because without that, you kind of negate all of the beautiful physical features.
Yeah.
Right. I think that when we're thinking about using sensory objects or sensory things, of course, talking to your OT about it so that you know it has a purpose and that it should be used or it should be tried and there's data. Of course, really thinking about it in that antecedent condition instead of the consequence condition is everything. Just like Kate was saying, the child exhibited SIB, self-interest behaviors, and then they get to go to this cool room with all this cool stuff that they love, and there's not really a lot of structure to it, or data sometimes taken. So,
well, and think about
that's
what
how
would
we
happen
design
after.
Right, and it's how we design our classrooms. So if we start in the antecedent phase, we set things up for success, like not having a ton of toys out in your classroom. It's just something as we push into classrooms that it's one of the first things we talk about is what's going on in your environment. What are the sensory inputs that are happening for you and your kids while you're in there?
Also, one thing I think, and Ted and Terry also mentioned this, is teaching the students where they're at, not where like the IEP goal is written at, because that's written for a 365-day calendar, and also child's minus ESY is only in school for 36 weeks a year. So teaching them where they're at and working with them to pair that environment that, hey, I'm going to get a lot of verbal reinforcement and start that non-contingent reinforcement with them when they finish their work. So they're hearing more of those yeses that Ted had mentioned.
Yep.
Yeah,
and maybe all the really cool stuff, all the best stuff, it's within sight but out of reach.
Absolutely.
And the way you gain access to that is by doing your work and having pretty good behavior. And the definition of doing your work and having pretty good behavior needs to be individualized too.
Yes.
Right.
Because each student, most students, it's going to be getting the work done and having good behavior, not a problem. But there's a smaller subset whose good behavior we're after is better than yesterday, because what we're doing is we're teaching them out of a lot of behavior and we're teaching them new stuff.
Well, and so something that I hear a lot from teachers when discussing sensory rooms, and a lot of the responses you get, well, they need to get their energy out and it's raining and, they need to move around. They need that input. Like, well, you can embed that in your instruction. There are so many, and Terry taught me so many cool games that are structured, and you can actually sneak sight words in there. And I love motor activities.
I love the sight word activity that I have. Like, I would put it on the smart board and I'd be like, we're going to practice our sight words. And like, you would say the word, it'd be like, do 5 jumping jacks. And you're like, what? The kids are like, oh, 1, 2, 3. Yeah. And you're like, great job. Now let's do the next one. Like, and they thought it was so much fun.
Right.
And I think, Katie, I agree. It's like, they don't have, and even that question where they're like, they need to get their energy out. It's like, why do they physically have to leave one space to do that? Why
Right, and
can't
they don't have to be sitting to do work. Like they could be
Yeah.
learning their work and still running around appropriately in how you want them to. And you can, all those behavioral goals, like taking turns or sharing preferred items, you can get data on this in this cool game that's motivating for the students, B, motivating for you, and you're all up and getting that energy out. So if you know a rainy day is coming up, this is a great antecedent thing to do.
Right.
I mean, do this before 2 p.m. when everyone's antsy and cranky.
There is research that shows that antecedent exercise does produce calmer
Yes, it
behavior
does.
for a while.
Katie,
Not
I
gonna
have
let
it.
stop it. But it's also the case, Katie, one thing I saw either you do or Maria, I don't remember which one, but it was either you or Maria, was kind of putting sight words around the room.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
Yep.
you'd say the
Katie's
word, and you
the
had to run
queen.
over the
I
word.
love it. I love it so much. I
Yeah.
will, if you give me an expo, I will write on your floors and your tables. But you can use
You can
sticky
do that
notes.
with sight words. You can do that with math facts. You can do that with so many
Absolutely.
other. You
Yes.
could do it with element symbols.
Mhm.
Find sodium. The kid has to run over to Na.
Right.
Nah.
And I know one thing Terry also introduced was a scooter board, like
Yeah.
having them swim over on the scooter board to that area. And like if
Well, and again, part of sensory can be the motor planning component. And so when I worked with Katie, that was part of when she did her instruction. We would actually make barriers so that they couldn't make a straight line to get to where they knew they needed to go, and they had to go around. And some of our kids with autism have significant motor planning difficulties. And so again, just that collaboration to think about how we can attack so many goals at one time if we plan ahead.
Yeah, there's differentiation in those activities, just like anything else. And there, you can group students together in little teams that make the most sense. And without Terry's input about, well, this student has certain disabilities or certain like physical things, barriers to help for them to participate in the activity, how can you differentiate that? And talking to Terry or your OT is you can make it happen. You can figure it out.
Well,
But it
and
does take collaboration.
this doesn't mean we have every activity being a running around.
Right.
Oh, no.
You're gonna, you're gonna be sweaty and
Be able
exhausted.
to sit and do stuff.
That's
Right.
right.
Because that's part of life.
That is
Exactly.
right.
If it involves eating, always sit when you're eating because you don't want to choke and die.
Right.
I'm
We
not
all
listening
need
to that.
able Sit and sit and do some work, sit and eat.
I think to
I know-
differentiate.
oh, sorry, what were you saying, Kate?
I was just going to say to speak on like the whole movement piece, because I know like we're if there's anyone listening, they may be general ed, but they also are that self-contained. I know for the general ed, I saw this often where we would do task cards, and we would like teachers would take the task cards and they take them throughout the hallway, which was great because you just saw this movement. And like if a child struggled with like, I don't know where this is, like that's where the teacher modeled problem solving, like you were talking about within the self-contained classroom, the barriers. And the teacher talked about like, okay, well, let's problem solve. This number right here is number 13. When I go to the right, it's getting bigger. When I go to the left, it's getting smaller. You're looking for a smaller number. What direction do you think we need to move in? And so it's like, just that's a way to that's the way we're differentiating, for cognitive levels.
Right.
And I
But
think
that could also be a motor planning issue, especially like if you're
Yes.
teaching things like on a number line. The number line can
Yeah.
be on the floor.
Right.
And when they're really moving their whole body, they're getting that concept.
Mhm.
And again, I've just seen great teachers.
yeah.
This gets me thinking though about the auditory learner and visual learner and all that stuff. There's research that shows that that's actually a bunch of nonsense.
Yeah.
Now, it doesn't mean that right now some people don't learn better by doing.
Right.
I have one of the guys who I'm working with, I'm doing academic remediation with. I started this 2 weeks ago. We started at beginning of first grade math. We're finishing first grade math this week and moving on to second grade. And I'll
Good
have
job.
up to sixth grade math by the end of the summer. But with him, we have to do a lot of doing right now. There were some things involving measuring, and measurement is just such an alien concept to him. So I have rulers, and I have in centimeters and inches. I have a 2 foot long one. I have a yardstick. And right now where he is, we can discuss it, but it's stuff he's never had experience with, never come into contact with. We may as well be discussing organic chemistry. But when he does it, it's so much simpler. This doesn't mean that he's a vestibular learner, I guess. I don't know what it's called. And
Kinesthetic.
everyone has to do that forever.
Right.
It means that's where he is right now.
Hmm.
And so right now when I'm teaching, I incorporate that, but I also have to work on him being able to, learn by hearing about it and seeing about it and reading about it and discussing it. And a lot of, a universal design is wonderful when it comes to cutouts, for wheelchairs and things of this sort. But when it comes to making accommodations, like the kid has difficulty reading, so I'm going to present the content auditorially. Well, that doesn't do anything to help the kid learn how to read.
Right.
So we have to, look at, there's a big difference between understanding the concept or the content, but learning the skill that you're not good at. We need to do both things. And sometimes with this styles of learning stuff, doing both things is thrown out the window.
I did a lot of research in graduate school related to this topic where I thought, it was several years ago. So the idea of like, we each have our own way of learning was very big. And what the research that I kind of came up with was actually it's not. We're all, we may guide ourselves more to one way, but the way we most efficiently and effectively learn something is with a multisensory approach. And I know, Terry, you can speak to that more. But specifically what I found to be one of the weakest areas is that, we as teachers we determine, nope, you're an auditory learner, you're a visual learner, you're a kinesthetic learner. And so we naturally place when they talked about this whole differentiation in groups when stations came out, they had, the kinesthetic kids over here, they had the auditory kids over here, and they had the visual kids over here, and they really didn't see any growth. And so what they found was then they took, having that be your control. And then, you have these kids where you then put them all together, and they found that those kids that engaged in all areas had greater success of picking up on the context. But I think that's just something that we impose as teachers. We impose a lot of things on children, and it's important that we allow that choice, which that was something that's huge, that is just within the last couple of years that's really coming out as something that we use in the classrooms. Because I remember I did a survey with the students that I was doing the research with, and they're at the cognitive level that they could communicate with me, and they finally just said when we were done, they're like, I just want to choose sometimes. Like, I'm always being told to do this or this or this. And sometimes I don't want to do it like that. Like, I want to do it like this, like my friend over here. Why can't I? And I was like, that's a very valid point that you have. So I think that's just important for us to remember.
And I think it's good too. My daughter goes to JMU and she wants to be an elementary school teacher. And she just read a book. His last name is Bowler, or her last name, but it talked about the growth mindset and this communicative approach, and also the opportunity to learn. And so the research showed the opportunity to learn, which was whatever math skill, having it done through graphs and manipulatives and words and all the different ways, so that every teacher can teach every skill in each of the ways, and they are all available. So that opportunity for all of those are available to every student, and to not limit students, like with that grouping piece, we arbitrarily decided things for others, which now you look back and go, wow, how did we do that? And thought we were doing something right. But it really is to set the bar very high and expect every one of them to be able to do it. The way they get there, might look different. And it's exactly what you said, Kate, that the research was unbelievable, and they did it, in California in some really difficult school divisions.
It would seem to me that this multi-sensory approach, one thing that does is gets a lot of active student responding.
Yes.
And approaching the same thing from different angles.
Yes. And
we know that people need to be actively involved with the content if they're going to learn from the content.
Yep.
It's they're not houseplants that we just pour the content into and they absorb it.
Right.
They have to be.
We'd love to be that.
Love to be a houseplant.
So much easier. Yeah.
No, and I think, Terry, like you talking about like picking that one type. I think of like this one, like a math worksheet where it has like one way, two ways. And in order for you to complete the activity, you have to demonstrate. And I think about elapsed time, because I love elapsed time, but I hate it because you can teach it through a graph style, or I taught it, and I don't know, there's probably someone much smarter than me that figured it out. Mountains, hills and molehills. And so that represented different time. And I had to teach myself how to use the graph style, but I said to my kids, like, listen, Miss Hazelwood doesn't use this. Like, it does not make sense in her head. I choose not to use it. You have that choice too. So if you present an activity, if you present an answer to me with this, I'm not going to be mad. But if it's wrong, you're going to have to walk through it with me to show me where we maybe messed up. And so I agree with that one activity where they're like, you have to use this style, and this style to complete. And to me, I think of, well, what happens if we know how to do the first type, but the last two types were like, I hate this way. I don't get this way. Why are you making me do it? Meltdown, throwing of the paper, and then it all becomes this behavior. And it's like, no, the task. It was the task.
And then you go to the sensory room.
And then you go to the sensory room.
Right. And you've escaped. And you get
Yeah. May I share my screen? May I share something?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to screen share right now. I hope nothing embarrassing pops up. Okay. What this is, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. This is a list of learning channels. This comes from Precision Teaching, a really great behavior analytic method for teaching. It builds fluency. And the terminology is a little mentalistic. We have input, we have output, but what this is on the input side is this is how you experience the task. Sensory modality through which you experience the task. And this is the response modality, how you do the task. And the fact is, there's most things we do involve being able to do it across several different modalities. Like, if I want to be able to say that the kid I'm working with can do single digit addition, well, he needs to be able to hear the problem, say the answer, hear the problem, write the answer, hear the problem, choose the answer. He needs to be able to see the problem, say the answer, see the problem, choose the answer, see the problem, write the answer, see the problem, construct the answer, like put 4 counting bears together. There's a whole lot of stuff. Most of what we teach, most of what we learn, most of our lives involves lots of different modalities. And all too often, we leave a lot of these things out when we're teaching. And when we leave things out when we're teaching, and the student learns it incompletely and the student doesn't perform well, we say, he didn't learn it. And we pass him on to the next grade with a C. When maybe he could have learned more if we taught more. And this, I Googled Learning Channels Precision Teaching, and this PDF came right up. So, just Google that. And what I teach my students in my program is when you're developing instruction, you got to look at teaching across modalities. You got to look at teaching across learning channels. And this is a cool thing because for whatever you're putting a lesson plan together, you can just figure out on this grid.
I love it.
Which experiential modalities are important and which response modalities are important. So you could be sure to build that multi-sensory, if you will, aspect of it into the instruction. And now I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Well, and I think too, what you're talking, where you said, they don't do so well and we just push them on. And I think it's so important, I know for the SOL grades, it's important that you get through the content because April and SOL start. Do what your students need. And if it's not like, why on earth would you be teaching multiplication when they have no concept of numbers or addition? Like, that doesn't make sense to me.
And it's going to elicit behaviors, like maladaptive behaviors. Yeah.
And I guess, that was always my biggest frustration as a teacher. And, growing up with teachers, I would always question that too. I was like, well, why? Like, why did, this raging teenager telling my parents, why doesn't anyone stand up to the people and tell them, that's not right, blah, blah, blah. And they're like.
And why in the world does my student with profound intellectual disability need to be able to point to land and water on a map and a globe? But that's part of the VAP, so I could be teaching how to ask for something to eat or something to drink. I could be teaching how to say, stop that. But instead, I'm teaching you to point to land on a map and water on a map and land and water on a globe.
identify
Because
the
that's going to serve you well in
peninsulas,
life.
tectonic
Yeah.
plates, stuff like that. I'm like, come on. you
National
guys.
holidays is also one that it's like identify Martin Luther King Day and Thanksgiving and
No, it's just like,
Yeah.
I don't know. That's been my big thing. And I like that you said, we just push them on. And it's like, I think, if you do have to move on in context, think about how in your classroom you can continue to bring back previous content that's taught. And I think that's where stations comes in great. I think that's where independent task bins, semi-direct instruction, so that, even though you're introducing maybe multiplication, you have your assistant, or you have, when you're doing pairs, they're working together on like building a concept that's weak, that's foundational for another skill. Sorry.
Yeah.
That's
I also think,
Yeah.
I think one thing Terry does super well, and when her and I would collaborate on different things, she would integrate a lot of different concepts that were taught in the classroom, like math, language arts, history, stuff like that. And so it would be sensory. We'd be doing activities that the child's getting a lot of feedback, potting plants, making food, doing all these hands-on activities, and getting those integrated. So you're learning life skills as well as.
Yeah, one of my favorite parts of teaching was working with Lauren and Terry at the same time
That
as
was the
speech therapist. And it was so cool because we were potting plants and we were cooking and we were targeting so many goals and so many things. And that awesome data sheet Ted just showed, that would have been cool to keep some data on it.
I think it's the value of
Yes.
value. And so Lauren, you even mentioned dates. What's the value of knowing a date if they don't have the understanding of what that date represents? You know what I mean? And so I just think it's important, with the potting and the cooking, those are all I think of the measurement you were talking about, Ted.
Right.
Cooking. That's
right.
such
That's what we did.
Exactly.
Well,
Yeah.
There's reading. There's
Yes.
some
You're
math
sneaking
involved, a little bit of
so
chemistry
many
involved.
skills
Yeah,
in there.
There's a
Yes.
lot of stuff there.
There was a lot.
So I think it's
And
just
people are smiling.
they're
There was
happy.
very few self-interest
they-
behaviors during those
It's
times.
motivating.
Yeah.
That's right. They went home and talked to their parents about it.
Yes.
I mean,
it was
Maladaptive behaviors were
marvelous.
low.
So I
Yeah.
think that's just something to think about, are we just trying to do a check on the list of what needs to be taught, or are we also embedding value? And I think the form that Ted showed us just showed us how valuable concepts could be.
Especially in self-contained rooms, it's all about functional skills and independence. And so thinking about that why, when you're looking at targeting those SOLs or whatever state you're in, those goals that you have to try to meet, you think about the why and how are you going to make that functional? How can you make your lessons functional and meet the criteria, which is not easy. That's not an easy task.
Well, and sometimes we don't know what the student really values. And the cooking thing came up this year with a student that Katie had and had a new teacher this year and was not demonstrating any of the same things. And thankfully we talked to the mom, who told us that his new thing was watching cooking shows.
Awesome.
And all of a sudden, the instruction shifted. And that was part of what we talked about, the things that we saw. Compliance increased, behavior went down. He was achieving his goals because we took time to get
to room.
We did not. And literally, he was demonstrating so many sensory behaviors. I was just so grateful that the timing of the universe occurred that we could talk to the mom, and she intervened before we added sensory. Because I probably would have. Yeah,
And
go ahead, Ted.
He was still exhibiting sensory behaviors when he was doing what he should be doing too. We're always exhibiting sensory behaviors, right?
Correct.
It's just you were getting the bad behavior or the behavior that's not real helpful when he wasn't being successful at his work. But I'm going to share my screen again.
Oh, and I'm going to talk about
We need a drum roll here.
What did I do? What did I do? What did I do? What did I do? Share. Okay. But again, I look at this more for planning the lesson than for evaluating afterwards.
Yeah.
What you did, Terry, was you kind of did some of this. You incorporated a lot more experiential modalities with regard to the content.
We did.
And when
we
you
usually add interverbals in there, like what do you taste? What do you smell?
And speech was part of the whole collaborative process.
Yep.
Yeah. And so
it was beautiful.
Initially, the modality in which things were being taught, there wasn't a lot of success there. What he was experiencing was no, wrong, no, wrong, no,
Right.
wrong. And then you switch it, so he's doing it from a lot of different angles, and he's getting yes, 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 no, yes, yes, no, yes, yes, yes. We always want there to be a few no's in there, because that's how we learn. But you made his world full of more reinforcement, and you're teaching him from lots of angles, and all of that behavior that you could call sensory behavior, but it's all sensory behavior.
Well, and
That
yeah,
went away, and he's learning more stuff, and he's doing other sensory behavior that's actually serving him well.
he is, and I think what we realized, he did a lot of spinning and flapping and running, and it was
Yeah.
avoidant, but he was also bored. There was
Sure.
not value to him. So
It's got to be motivation. Yeah.
well, and the teacher kept saying that the work was too hard. But thankfully, I had seen him do the work last year, and I went, oh no, this work is not too hard. So there's another variable. So again, meaning well, we can think right away it's just the task demand's too hard.
Well, and I
It
think
wasn't that. It just had to be tied to something that was his interest right
motivating.
now.
Meaningful.
Yeah,
Well,
that
and I think-
MO thing.
I know a lot of I know as teachers we have to put the essential question, the big question. And I think of, so I'll go back to an SOL because that's where my primary experience has been and coins. Do you know how irritating coins are? They're so frustrating to teach.
Yeah.
We rarely
Yep.
use them, but however, people still do. My dad still carries, a good chunk of change just in case.
yeah.
Ted, yeah.
I actually have, and it won't run on a Mac, it'll run on a Windows machine. I actually have a stimulus equivalence program for teaching that a
Really?
former student of mine developed. Gino Binkert, smartest guy in the world, brand new BCBA.
I thought that was
Ted.
Ted.
He collected a lot of data on it. He used it with the students in his classroom. I've seen coin values and coin equivalences taught so badly so many times.
Yes.
Your students can learn this in a day.
But see, the problem is that with coin value, we would teach what is this object? It's a penny. It's a penny. How much is a penny? How much is a nickel?
Yeah,
We've
that's
all heard that song.
Yeah.
But the problem is that there's no value to it. And so when I started teaching coins, I would say, why is it important that you need to know coins? And they're like, to buy stuff. I was like, no. What are you going to buy? And they're like, well, I'd buy Takis. I buy a soda, I buy a candy bar. And I'm like, yes. So throughout this lesson, throughout the next couple of weeks, we are going to learn how to earn coins and money so that you can exchange them with Ms. Hazelwood, who is going to then give those items to
Which
you.
is functional.
Which
Yeah.
is functional.
Yeah.
And
You made it meaningful. And
yeah, so you better believe, when I presented any kind of task demand, they're like, how much is this one worth? I'm like, 25 cents. It's on the top of the page. And they understood, if I do this, we were learning contingencies.
Right.
Complete this task, you earn this.
Right.
But I think, that to me, that is something that a lot of, from grade to grade, kids, when they add more stuff to it, when they just build on it, because that foundational value wasn't there.
Right.
When it is important, it's not. They're like, I don't understand.
Yeah.
Oh, Terry, your hand is raised.
I raised my hand because I saw that it's 10:18, and something that I felt like was very important for us to address, and maybe specifically Lauren,
Oh, joy.
is how Chewies are a barrier to communication.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? And I was like, oh my goodness,
Yes.
that was one of the things in my mind when
Yes.
we must talk about this. So I am hijacking, and I apologize.
Please.
I don't want
No,
us
this
to run
is
out of time.
So
It's
important.
huge.
We
I
all
need
feel
to,
very strongly about this.
Please,
so.
please pardon me while I move my soapbox over so I can.
Yes, please stand on it, nice
Slide
and
it on.
tall.
Hold on, there you go.
Go.
No, so I am not a proponent of Chewies. I feel like they are often put in IEPs to appease parents. And I know that's, a little iffy to say. But I think Chewies, when you have a child who has something in their mouth constantly, unless it's a binky and the child is still an infant, it really impedes communication because they're not able to move their articulators, their tongue, their teeth. All these different things are impeded because they're working to keep that chewy in their mouth. And I mean, Katie, one of the children in her classroom, came to us and he had this long chewy in his mouth and he would hold it
Right.
in a cigar-like fashion and walk through it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And the mom was concerned about articulation And I think the first thing that we addressed was we will not be targeting articulation until that Chewy's out of the picture.
Mhm.
And previously when we had talked, the kid came from preschool and had this Chewy.
Right.
And we had talked to the preschool teacher and she's like, well, he needs it. It's what he craves throughout the day.
Mhm.
And when
Yeah,
we
there's just misinformation. A lot of teachers think that they're helping, and you know, there's
Yeah,
the intentions are good. but-
And that's what
Never
he was
bad
using
intention.
first. Right. They were thinking it was self-regulation, so that
Yeah.
they should not remove it. Mhm.
Yes. And so I truly, I
Here, Lauren,
think,
so here's something that I want to, you can maybe follow it up. So I had a student, could communicate perfectly fine, still had some speech services, but I can't honestly remember everything right now, but they would hold this thing in their mouth because it would be like on a lanyard, and they would chew on it and try to talk to me.
Mhm.
And while talking to me,
Lauren.
would also spit
Yeah.
Yes.
all over the table.
Yes. Or
And
flick it.
I remember, you know, just pressing back and saying, if you want to talk to me, I need this to be out of your mouth. Well, Miss Hazelwood got in trouble later on because the child goes home to the parent, communicates this with the parent. The parent is like, it's in their IEP. So can you kind of touch on that? Like,
Yeah.
yes.
So I guarantee you that IEP said the Chewy is available. The child has to have it. Access are
Yes.
available. So I would say you have if that is written in an IEP, I think that's something to discuss. And if the child's at a cognitive level that they, then like that they're able to, you know contingencies. If they want the Chewy, they can go to this one space. They do not leave, like put painter's tape on the floor, take an expo marker. They can have the Chewy in that one space.
Mhm.
No one's talking to you. However, if you want to work on the computer, if you want to play with your friends, if you want to talk to me, you have to leave that space in the Chewy. And you're still giving the child access. If that child needs that Chewy, they're able to access it at any time. You're not impeding this.
Yep. And I think that's like, where's the motivation? And I think, you know,
Yes.
in that situation, it was like, you know, it was funny because like the kid would sometimes come in and take it off, throw it in their desk and not use it. And where I think adults, we would impose like, no, you need this. And it's like, no.
Is it functional?
Yeah.
You are so nicely raising your hand.
Yeah, Cooper and I are both raising our hands. You know, and you say, oh, the mailman just came back. You say,
Oh,
you know,
no.
if the child has the cognitive ability. Well, yeah. And even if you think the child doesn't, I've worked with kids from infancy. I've worked with people from infancy through elderly. And back when I worked with primarily small children and infants, I was told so many times, you can't work with this one because his intellectual level is too low for him to learn anything. And that's utter nonsense.
Yeah.
What you can do with that Chewy for one of those students who you think maybe doesn't have the cognitive ability, you can make access to the Chewy contingent on completing other things, starting with little things and building up from there. And I would recommend always doing it on a variable ratio schedule or variable interval, but not fixed, because what you'll also learn is that these kids with what we call limited cognitive functioning perform those fixed interval or fixed ratio stair step patterns or fixed interval scallops perfectly, because there's not a lot of verbal mediation getting in the way of that. And so what I'm suggesting is use it exactly like Lauren's saying, and if maybe the kid's not there yet, you could still use it as a reinforcer.
Yeah.
So where Katie was talking about before, using some of these items as an antecedent approach, and where Terry has shifted more for some of these students where, again, it's individualized, we may need to be using it in the consequence phase. Understood?
Right.
And oftentimes I feel like these are put in an IEP and you can say the child needs that input to work. And I think there's more developmentally appropriate ways. And we're trying to obviously get the child to be as high functioning and as independent as possible. And you're not going to go to the grocery store and talk to someone with soggy, drippy, salivary
They say, ew, gross, and walk away.
Right. And is there a plan to fade it out? Like,
Yes.
is there a
Well,
plan?
or even the replacement, because so we were able to use those water bottles that have that really thick,
Yep.
you know,
That,
rubber
like
thing.
flip up and
Yes. Yeah,
Mhm.
and at least then that could go down and they could be drinking water, so that that was an intermediator or intermediary
Mhm.
object. But the other thing that Chad had really taught me was to make the other things that you're doing um, maybe more interesting.
Yep.
And so we talked a lot about just from brain input, and because we know oral motor is very, has strong input to the brain, but so does vestibular. So we did more active things and some jumping and stomping and marching and all of that. And that seemed to have that same kind of effect in terms of allowing the child to continue and complete tasks.
Yeah.
And they weren't going back to it because we had engaged them in something. I think that from a sensory perspective, it was embedded. It was something that was very ballistic, and it affected their joints and muscles and position in space. And it had a very, very positive effect.
So
I would also, oh, sorry, Kate.
no, go finish.
I would also say, because a lot of families, I worked with one family this year who the child was 7 and the mom was saying, like, she's just not talking at home. And her and I had sent recordings of like him asking and demanding for things, and it was wonderful, like the language that we were getting in the classroom. But I was like, why, when we were discussing, like, it just doesn't seem normal, it's not generalizing at home. So I was like, can you just make a schedule of what he's doing throughout the day, like once he gets home? And she's like, well, he comes in and then he takes his binky and he has his binky in his mouth the rest of the evening. Like, well, that's,
There you go.
There we go. I think
So-
too, like I was thinking, pica.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I think it kind of goes to what we were talking about, like we're just replacing another behavior, like, where we're like, oh,
Is it more functional? Yeah.
is it more functional? And I struggled with this my first year, and now sitting here in the position I'm in now, I'm like, oh my gosh, I would have never done that. Cause it's like, it's like we're telling a child, nope, you're not going to eat this, but we're going to give you this really durable
That's not
plastic,
Yeah.
which I had experience where a child ate through the plastic, and it's like, that's not safe. Like,
if it's non-edible, I would prefer it not going in people's mouths.
Right.
so I think that's just something to think. I feel like at least with the experience that I've had, and parents have said like, oh, they have pica, like we need to be giving them this. It's like, but why? Like, where is the evidence that says when an individual has pica, we need to be giving them chewies? Like, where is that?
Yeah.
I don't know.
And I personally have not worked with anyone with pica. Ted, I feel like you have worked with everyone
I
on
have.
Yeah.
And so what was the result?
Oh,
was
you
something
kind
that
of need
worked?
to do a good functional assessment or functional analysis, figure out why the pica is happening. A lot of people jump to the conclusion that it's sensory, so they'll give him the chewy, or they'll say it's nutritional, so he needs more vitamins. But a lot of times, the pica is happening, I think most of the time, because it is maintained by the reinforcement it produces. This is like any other self-stimulatory behavior in that regard. And first of all kids do it, right? In infancy and toddlerhood, all kids do it. Most kids move on to bigger and better things,
Right.
because life becomes more interesting.
That's right.
For kids with disabilities who have different, who learn differently, life doesn't always move on to bigger and better things in regard to that. And so the behavior persists beyond age when it might go away for other kids. And it persists because it produces lots of stimulation. And these kids end up, they get very good at seeking out pica material,
Right.
and add to that depending on their living story, I've worked with kids, toddlers and young kids who are literally starving for attention.
Yes.
These are
We're
kids
also
I work
very
with
hungry
who
for
were
real.
food refusal kids who only time they got attention was when their parents were trying to feed them. And so the kid would scream and cry and refuse food because the parent would attend quite a lot then, even though it was awful attention. Quit that, stop that, you make me sick, blah, blah, blah. And so the kid learned to not eat because that produces attention. Well, the pica comes under control of that social reinforcement for the same reason for some people, because suddenly people are getting up and chasing after you and saying,
Right.
quit that, stop that. And so, one of the first interventions that I do for someone when it appears that it is sensory is there's this thing called the Home Accident Prevention Inventory, HAPI. It was in Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis, I think in 1985. Look it up, download it. You gotta update it for the times, because there's still like spinning wheels and all sorts of things that we had back in the day.
We did.
Now, but first you work with the parents to kind of PICA-proof the home. And then you got to teach a whole lot of play skills and a lot of other skills. And you have to teach the parents how to do differential attention and beef up the attention that the kid's given because, it's happening for a reason. It's producing stimulation. So I got to give alternative stimulation. That's as much fun or more and just as easy or easier. And we got to replace the attention that used to come for that with other attention. And it's a big, hard job.
It is. And Chad did something one time, similarly, it makes me think about this with a hat that had headphones and it was connected with an iPad. So when the child was not doing the behavior like PICA or whatever it would be, the music would play, their favorite music. But
little
when
Bluetooth beanies.
Yes, the Bluetooth beanies, yes.
Mhm.
And I thought, wow, that, you're talking with what Ted is saying, I'm going, how awesome would that be? Because someone sat remotely, you know what I mean? And turned that on and off depending. And it totally shaped that child.
So
and
guys,
it was
I'm
another
really-
go ahead.
I'm so sorry.
Oh,
I have to
no.
go work with a child.
I'm sorry. No.
How dare you, right?
I'm so sorry. Yeah, I'm working, I promise. Thank you guys. And if there's any
you.
questions, we'll be back. We'll be back on Tuesday and Thursday again.
What are we discussing next week? Great question.
Let me look
Movies,
at
snacks, shopping, all of that.
one.
I know there was one topic I brought up with Chad about
Yeah, it
talking
might
about
be-
behavior, like the discrepancy between behavior and academic behavior, and talking and just kind of working on how it's all the same thing.
Yeah, and it's a teacher's perspective on behavior. Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
That would be a fun one to kind of demystify, if we say.
Correct. All right, team. I got to roll. Sorry.
Bye. Have a great rest of the day.
I'll see you guys. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.